This evening, I opened my Bible to Psalm 23 and found a bookmark tucked between the pages. It wasn't special, just a simple strip of paper, worn from use, bent at the corners. Yet the moment I saw it, I smiled. Because Psalm 23 has carried me through more seasons than I can count. The Lord is my shepherd. Those words have comforted me in waiting rooms, comforted me during difficult nights, comforted me when plans failed, comforted me when answers seemed far away. Tonight the house is quiet, a gentle breeze moves through the curtains. The lamp beside my chair glows softly, and the bookmark reminds me of all the places God has shepherded me. There were valleys I never wanted to enter. There were roads I never planned to travel. There were seasons I prayed would end quickly. Yet looking back, I can see His hand everywhere, leading, protecting, providing, guiding, even when I could not recognize it. The older I become, the more grateful I am for God's leadership. Because I have learned something about myself. When I lead alone, I often become anxious. I worry, I rush, I try to force outcomes. I attempt to solve problems before they exist. But when I allow God to lead, peace returns, not because every situation becomes easy, because the burden no longer rests entirely on my shoulders. The bookmark remains between the pages, a reminder that God never asked me to be my own shepherd. He asked me to follow Him. Outside, the stars begin appearing above the neighborhood. The evening deepens, and gratitude fills my heart. Because every chapter of my life tells the same story. God was faithful again and again. Through every valley, through every mountain, through every unanswered question, the future still contains unknowns. But tonight, I am not afraid of them, because the shepherd who guided yesterday is already present in tomorrow, and that truth allows me to rest. The Bible closes gently, the bookmark remains inside, and peace remains inside my heart. Several years ago, there was a chair beside a large window in a hospital waiting area. I remember it clearly, the color of the fabric, the shape of the armrests, the view beyond the glass. I spent many hours sitting there, waiting, praying, hoping. Some days felt long, some nights felt longer. The future seemed uncertain. The answers I wanted were not arriving quickly. And yet that chair became a place where God taught me trust. At first, I prayed for immediate solutions, immediate healing, immediate certainty. But over time, my prayers began changing. Instead of asking only for answers, I began asking for strength. Instead of demanding clarity, I began asking for peace. And God answered, not always the way I expected, but faithfully. The chair near the window became sacred ground, not because of the building, because God's presence met me there. The sunlight would enter each morning, the darkness would return each evening. Day after day, the cycle continued, and with every sunrise, God reminded me that His mercy was still new, His love was still present, His promises were still true. Looking back now, I realize something beautiful. The greatest miracle of that season was not merely what happened around me. It was what happened inside me. Faith grew, patience grew, trust grew. The waiting changed me, the uncertainty changed me, the presence of God changed me. The room is quiet tonight as I remember those days, and gratitude fills my heart because God never abandoned me. In the waiting room, not once. He sat beside me through every fear, every prayer, every difficult conversation, every uncertain moment. The chair still exists somewhere. People still sit there today, people carrying burdens, people carrying hope, people carrying tears. And if I could speak to them, I would tell them this: God is closer than you think. Even here, especially here, because His faithfulness shines brightest when we need Him most. Several years ago, there was a large clock above the entrance of the community center in my neighborhood. Every day people pass beneath it. Children, parents, workers, students. Everyone checked the time. Everyone seemed to be in a hurry. And for many years, so was I. I measured life by schedules, deadlines, appointments, timetables. I believed progress depended entirely on speed. The faster I moved, the better life would become, or so I thought. Then one day, while sitting on a bench nearby, I noticed something. The clock was moving steadily, patiently, never rushing, never stopping, never panicking. Simply moving forward, one moment at a time. And somehow God used that ordinary observation to teach me an extraordinary lesson. Growth has a pace, healing has a pace, faith has a pace, God has a pace. And it is rarely the same pace as our impatience. How many times have I demanded immediate results? How many times have I wanted God to hurry? How many times have I mistaken delay for an inactivity? The years have taught me something valuable. God is never late, not once, not ever. His timing may differ from mine, but His timing may differ from mine. But His timing remains perfect. The clock above the community center reminded me that life is not a race against everyone else. It is a journey with God, a journey lived one faithful step at a time. One prayer at a time, one day at a time. Tonight, as I remember that clock, peace fills my heart, because I realize I do not need to rush what God is still developing. I do not need to force what God is still preparing. I do not need to fear what God already understands. The future will arrive when it arrives. The answers will come when they come, and God's faithfulness will remain exactly where it has always been. Steady, patient, reliable, like the clock quietly moving forward, moment by moment, day by day, year by year, guided by the God who holds every second in His hands. Tonight, as I walked through the hallway, I noticed an old coat hanging on the wooden rack beside the door. It has been there for weeks, maybe longer. Most days I pass by it without noticing. Yet tonight, something about it captured my attention. Perhaps it was the way the evening light touched its shoulders. Perhaps it was because the house had become so quiet. Or perhaps God wanted to remind me of something. The coat looked ready for a journey, ready to be worn, ready to leave, ready to move forward. And And as I stood there looking at it, I realized how many seasons of my life have been spent waiting for the next step, waiting for clarity, waiting for answers, waiting for opportunities, waiting for God to reveal what comes next. At times, waiting feels uncomfortable. We want movement, progress, results. We want certainty before we begin. Yet faith often asks us to prepare before we fully understand. The coat hanging in the hallway reminded me of that truth. A traveler does not wait until the entire road is visible before putting on the coat. He prepares first, then he walks. The room remains silent. The evening settles softly around the house. And I think about all the times God asked me to prepare for blessings I could not yet see, the opportunities that had not arrived, the doors that had not opened, the answers that had not yet appeared. At the time, preparation felt unnecessary. Yet later I discovered God was already working, already arranging details, already making a way. The older I become, the more I appreciate the hidden work of God, the work that happens before visible results appear, the work that happens in waiting seasons, the work that happens behind closed doors. The code reminds me that preparation is also an act of faith, trusting God enough to get ready, trusting God enough to remain hopeful, trusting God enough to believe His promises are still moving toward fulfillment. Outside, the evening sky grows darker. The neighborhood becomes quiet, and peace settles into my heart. Because I remember every season of waiting eventually revealed God's faithfulness. Every delay eventually carried purpose. Every unanswered question eventually taught trust. The coat remains hanging by the door, still ready, still waiting. And perhaps tonight my heart needs to do the same. Remain ready, remain hopeful, remain faithful. Because the God who guided every previous journey is preparing the next one too. And when His timing arrives, I will be ready to walk. There was a door I knocked on for a very long time. Not a physical door. A door of opportunity, a door of hope. A door connected to dreams I carried for years. I prayed for it, worked toward it, prepared for it, believed for it. For a long time I was convinced it would eventually open. Everything in me expected it. I imagined what life would look like beyond that door. I imagined the blessings, the possibilities, the future. Yet the door remained closed. Month after month, year after year, I kept knocking, I kept praying, I kept hoping. Eventually something unexpected happened. I became tired, not tired of faith, not tired of God. Tired of trying to force an answer. Tired of holding on to expectations that God seemed unwilling to fulfill. And one day, quietly, I stopped knocking, not out of bitterness, not out of defeat, out of surrender. I remember that season clearly. At first it felt like failure, like giving up, like losing something important. But looking back now, I understand what was really happening. God was teaching me trust, real trust. The kind of trust that continues even when desired outcomes never arrive. The kind of trust that believes God is good even when doors remain closed. The kind of trust that rests in His wisdom rather than personal understanding. The room is quiet tonight as I think about that chapter. A lamp glows softly beside the chair. Outside, the evening sky has faded into darkness, and gratitude fills my heart because that closed door eventually led me somewhere better. Not easier, better. A place I never would have discovered if my original plans had succeeded. A place prepared by God's wisdom rather than my preferences. The amazing thing is that I could not see it at the time. All I saw was the closed door, the disappointment, the unanswered prayer. But God saw the road beyond it, the opportunities beyond it, the blessings beyond it. How many times have we mistaken redirection for rejection? How many times have we assumed a closed door meant God was withholding something good? How many times have we failed to recognize His protection? The years have taught me that God sometimes says no because He loves us. Sometimes He redirects because He sees what we cannot. Sometimes He closes one door because another path is waiting. A better path, a wiser path, a path we never would have chosen ourselves. The evening grows quieter, the house settles into stillness, and I find myself thanking God for the door that never opened. A sentence I never thought I would say, yet I mean it. Because His wisdom proved greater than mine, His timing proved better than mine, His plan proved stronger than mine. The door remains closed, but my heart remains open, open to His guidance, open to His timing, open to His purpose. And tonight I rest in the confidence that every door God closes and every door God opens is part of a story written by perfect love. A story that is still unfolding, a story guided by grace, a story held securely in His hands. There is an empty picture frame sitting on a bookshelf in my living room. For months it has remained there without a photograph. Most visitors never notice it. Most days I don't notice it either. Yet this evening it caught my attention. The frame stands ready, prepared, waiting, yet still empty. And somehow it reminded me of the future. There are chapters of life that remain unfinished, dreams still forming, prayers still waiting, stories still being written. We often become frustrated by empty spaces. We want immediate fulfillment, immediate clarity, immediate results. Yet God often works differently. Sometimes He prepares the frame before He provides the picture. Sometimes He prepares the heart before He provides the blessing. Sometimes He prepares the person before He reveals the purpose. The empty frame reminds me of that truth tonight. Not every promise is fulfilled immediately. Not every answer arrives quickly. Not every dream blossoms overnight. Yet preparation is still progress. Waiting is still part of the journey. The room feels peaceful. The evening sky glows softly beyond the window. And as I look at the empty frame, hope begins growing inside me. Because emptiness does not always mean absence. Sometimes emptiness means expectation. Sometimes emptiness means something beautiful is still coming. The older I become, the more evidence I see of God's timing. Blessings that arrived later than expected. Opportunities that appeared after long delays. Answers that came when I had nearly stopped looking. Again and again, God proved faithful. Again and again, His timing proved wiser than mine. The freight remains empty tonight, but I no longer see emptiness. I see possibility. I see potential. I see a reminder that God is still writing the story. The future remains unwritten, yet it remains safely held by the author. And because of that, I can wait with hope. I can trust with confidence. I can rest with peace. The picture is coming. The story is unfolding. And God's faithfulness will be visible in every detail. When I was a child, There was a garden behind my grandfather's house. It wasn't large, it wasn't famous, it wasn't particularly impressive, yet I loved it. Rows of vegetables stretched across the soil, flowers grew near the fence, fruit trees stood quietly along the edge of the property. Every visit seemed to begin there, and every visit seemed to teach a lesson. At the time I didn't realize it. I simply enjoyed being with my grandfather. I enjoyed the stories, the conversations, the peaceful afternoons. Years later I understand something I missed as a child. The garden was teaching me about faith. My grandfather never seemed rushed. He planted seeds, watered the ground, pulled weeds, waited patiently, confidently. He understood something I did not. Growth takes time. The seed planted today does not become fruit tomorrow. The harvest requires patience, trust, consistency. As I think about that garden tonight, I realize how often I want spiritual growth to happen instantly. I want immediate answers, immediate results, immediate transformation. Yet God often works like a gardener, patiently, faithfully, quietly. He plants truth, He waters faith. He removes things that hinder growth, and then He waits. Not because He is inactive, because growth requires time. The memory of that garden fills me with gratitude. I remember walking beside my grandfather as he pointed toward tiny sprouts emerging from the soil. To me they looked insignificant. To him they represented promise, potential, future harvest. Perhaps God sees us that way too. We often focus on what is incomplete. God focuses on what He is growing. We focus on current struggles. God sees future fruit. We focus on slow progress. God sees transformation unfolding. The room is quiet tonight. The memory feels vivid, almost close enough to touch. I can nearly smell the soil, nearly hear the birds, nearly see the sunlight falling across the rows of growing plants. And in that memory, God speaks again. Trust the process, trust the season, trust the gardener. The future still contains growth I cannot yet see. Prayer still developing, dreams still maturing, lessons still taking root. Yet I am less anxious than I once was, because I remember the garden, I remember the patience, I remember the harvest that eventually arrived. And I remember the God who remains faithful through every season of growth. The garden behind my grandfather's house may belong to the past, but its lesson remains alive. God is still working, God is still growing, God is still faithful, and one day cultivating all along. This afternoon, after leaving the grocery store, I placed a bag on the passenger seat and began driving home. Nothing unusual, just another ordinary errand, another ordinary day. Yet as I waited at a red light, I glanced at the bag and found myself thinking about provision. The groceries inside were simple: bread, fruit, milk, everyday necessities, the kind of things we often take for granted. And suddenly I remembered all the times God provided exactly what I needed. Not always what I wanted, not always when I expected, but always what I truly needed. The years have taught me that provision often arrives quietly. A job opportunity, a timely conversation, a helping hand, a door opening unexpectedly, a bill paid, a burden lifted. God rarely announces these things with fanfare. He simply remains faithful again and again. The road stretched ahead, the afternoon sun warmed the windshield, and gratitude filled my heart because I realized how many prayers God has already answered, how many needs He has already supplied, how many worries He has already carried. There were seasons when I doubted, seasons when resources seemed insufficient, seasons when the future felt uncertain. Yet somehow provision always arrived. Maybe not early, but never late. The grocery bag beside me became a reminder that God's faithfulness is often visible in ordinary things, ordinary meals, ordinary days, ordinary blessings. The truth is that many miracles wear ordinary clothes, and tonight I find myself thankful for every one of them. Thankful for daily bread, thankful for daily grace, thankful for a God who continues providing long after I stop noticing how much He does. The journey home eventually ended. The groceries found their place, but the lesson remained. God is faithful, not only in extraordinary moments, but also in ordinary afternoons, driving home. This afternoon, while searching for a recipe in an old cookbook, a folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages and landed softly on the kitchen counter. At first I assumed it was a grocery list, maybe an old note, something forgotten long ago. But when I unfolded it, I discovered a handwritten Bible verse. The handwriting belonged to my mother. I recognized it immediately, the careful curves of the letters, the familiar way she underlined important words, the small notes she sometimes added in the margins. For a moment, I simply stood there holding the paper. The kitchen became quiet. The afternoon sunlight rested gently on the counter, and memories began returning one by one. I remembered watching her read her Bible early in the morning before anyone else was awake. I remembered hearing her pray softly in another room. I remembered seeing scripture verses tucked into drawers, books, mirrors, and notebooks throughout the house. At the time, I did not fully understand what she was doing. Now I do. She was planting seeds, seeds of faith, seeds of hope, seeds of truth. The verse she had written was familiar, a promise about God's faithfulness, a reminder that He would never leave nor forsake His children. Simple words, yet as I read them again, they felt fresh, alive, personal, exactly what I needed today. Life has a way of making us forget God's goodness,
forget His promises,
forget the countless ways He has already carried us.
That is why reminders matter.
That is why scripture matters.
That is why faithful people
leave traces of God's truth behind them. Years after writing those words, my mother had no idea they would encourage me today. Yet God knew exactly when I would find them,
exactly
when I would need them,
exactly
how they would speak into my current season. The older I become,
the more I appreciate
these quiet moments of grace.
Not dramatic miracles,
not thunder from heaven, just a verse hidden inside a cookbook, waiting patiently for the right day. The room remained peaceful, the paper rested in my hands, and gratitude filled my heart. Gratitude for the people God places in our lives.
gratitude
For the legacy of faith they leave behind.
gratitude
For the way God's word continues speaking across generations. I think about all the seeds planted in my own life, the prayers spoken over me, the verses shared with me, the encouragement given during difficult seasons. Many of those moments seem small at the time, yet they became foundations.
they became anchors,
They became evidence of God's care. The handwritten verse reminds me that God's truth never loses its power. Years may pass,
seasons may change
people may come,
and go,
yet His promises remain. The afternoon slowly moved toward evening. The sunlight shifted across the room, and peace settled deeply into my heart. Because the God who spoke through that verse years ago is still speaking today, still guiding,
still comforting,
still stronger than every uncertainty waiting beyond tomorrow. This afternoon, before starting the car, I noticed a journal resting on the passenger seat. I had brought it along intending to write during a quiet moment later in the day. As I looked at it, I thought about all the journals I have filled over the years. Pages of prayers, pages of hopes, pages of questions, pages of gratitude. Some entries were written during joyful seasons, others were written through tears. Some recorded victories, others recorded struggles. Yet every journal tells the same story: God's faithfulness, again and again. The journal beside me reminds me how much God has done, how many prayers He has answered, how many fears He has calmed, how many impossible situations He has carried me through. At the time each page was written, I rarely knew how the story would unfold. I simply recorded what I was experiencing, what I was hoping, what I was trusting God with. Years later, those same pages became testimonies, evidence that God was working, even when I could not see it. The afternoon sun shines through the windshield. Cars move slowly along the road, and gratitude fills my heart, because every page points toward the same conclusion: God has been faithful, not once or twice, repeatedly, consistently, patiently. The future still contains blank pages, prayers not yet answered, dreams not yet fulfilled, stories not yet completed. Yet I face those pages differently now, with confidence, because I know the author, the same God who wrote faithfulness into previous chapters remains present in the chapters ahead. The journal remains on the passenger seat, waiting for new entries, waiting for new stories, waiting for new evidence of grace. And I have no doubt those pages will be filled, because God's faithfulness is far from finished. The story continues, and His goodness continues with it. When I was young, my grandmother kept a small lamp near the front window of her house. Every evening she turned it on. Every evening it glowed softly against the darkness. No matter the weather, no matter the season, No matter what was happening in life, the lamp always shined. As a child, I never thought much about it. It was simply part of the house, part of the routine, part of the familiar comfort of visiting her home. Years later, I understand why that memory remains so powerful. Because the lamp represented something larger: consistency, faithfulness, hope. My grandmother possessed a quiet faith. Not loud, not dramatic, not attention-seeking, simply steady. The kind of faith that continues praying when answers are delayed. The kind of faith that continues trusting when circumstances are difficult. The kind of faith that continues shining even during dark seasons. The lamp reminds me of that faith. The older I become, the more I appreciate steady people. People who remain faithful, people who remain kind, people who remain hopeful, people whose lives quietly point others toward God. My grandmother was one of those people, and her influence continues long after many conversations have faded from memory. The lamp in the window glowed every night, a simple light, yet it became a symbol, a reminder that darkness never completely wins, a reminder that God's presence remains, a reminder that hope continues shining. Tonight, as I remember that lamp, gratitude fills my heart. Gratitude for faithful examples, gratitude for prayers spoken long ago, gratitude for the people God uses to shape our faith. The world still contains darkness, challenges still exist, questions still remain. Yet God's light continues shining, quietly, faithfully, steadily, just like that lamp. And tonight, that light continues guiding my heart toward home. Several years ago, I wrote a letter I never sent. It still exists somewhere, folded inside an old box, tucked between papers and forgotten memories. At the time writing it felt necessary. There were things I needed to say, thoughts I needed to release, questions I needed to process. The letter was addressed to someone who had deeply affected my life, someone who had hurt me, someone I struggled to understand, someone whose actions left wounds that lasted much longer than I expected. I spent hours writing, page after page, every emotion, every disappointment, every unanswered question. By the time I finished, I felt exhausted, yet strangely lighter. The next morning I planned to send it, but I didn't. Something stopped me, not fear, not hesitation. Something quieter, the sense that God was asking me to wait. So I folded the letter, placed it in a box, and left it there. Days became weeks, weeks became months, months became years. The letter remained unsent. Looking back now, I am grateful, because time changed something. Not the past, not the events, not the wounds. Time changed me. God used the waiting to heal places inside my heart. He softened anger, He replaced bitterness with compassion. He gave me perspective I did not possess when I first wrote those words. The amazing thing is that forgiveness often begins before emotions fully cooperate. Sometimes forgiveness begins as obedience, a decision, a surrender, a willingness to let God carry what we can no longer carry ourselves. The room is quiet tonight, a gentle lamp glows nearby, and I think about how many people are carrying unsent letters inside their hearts. Words they wish they could say, conversations they wish they could have, pain they wish others understood. I understand, I truly do. Yet God has taught me something important. Healing does not always require the other person to change. Sometimes healing begins when we place the entire story into God's hands. The letter I never sent became part of my healing, not because it solved everything, because it helped me release everything. Release the need for explanations, release the need for justice on my timetable, release the need to control the outcome. The years have taught me that God is far better at carrying burdens than I am, far better at judging fairly, far better at healing wounded hearts. The letter remains in the box, the pain is largely fading, the lesson remains. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is trusting God with what we cannot fix. And tonight that trust brings peace, a peace stronger than resentment, a peace deeper than disappointment, a peace only God can give.
This afternoon, while searching through an old desk drawer, I found a folded map I had not seen in years. The paper was worn, the corners were bent, the fold lines had become permanent from being opened and closed so many times. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Then I unfolded it carefully across the desk. Immediately, memories returned. The map belonged to a season when I was trying to plan every detail of my future. I had highlighted routes, circled destinations, marked possibilities. I remember believing that if I could create the perfect plan, everything would work out exactly as expected. I wanted certainty, direction, control. I wanted to know where every road would lead before taking the first step. Looking at that old map now makes me smile, 'cause life unfolded very differently. Many of the places I expected to go never became part of my story. Many of the roads I carefully planned were never traveled. And some of the greatest blessings of my life arrived from directions I never considered. The room is quiet, the afternoon sun shines through the window. And as I look at the faded map, I realize how patient God has been with me. How often I insisted on my own understanding. How often I demanded details He chose not to reveal. How often I mistook uncertainty for absence. Yet through every season He guided me. Not always with a map, but always with His presence. The older I become, the more I understand that God rarely gives us the entire route. Instead, He gives us enough grace for the next step, enough wisdom for today, enough light for this moment. The rest requires trust. I think about Abraham leaving his homeland without knowing exactly where he was going. I think about Moses leading people through a wilderness he had never crossed before. I think about the disciples following Jesus without fully understanding where the journey would take them. Faith has never depended upon complete information. Faith depends upon trusting the one who knows the destination. The map before me represents an old version of myself, a version that believed peace could be found through perfect planning. But experience has taught me otherwise. Peace is not found in knowing everything. Peace is found in knowing God. The future remains partly hidden. There are still questions, still dreams, still unknown roads ahead. Yet tonight I feel less anxious about them, because the God who guided me through every previous chapter remains faithful. The roads I never expected often became the roads where His goodness was most visible. The detours became testimonies, the delays became preparation. The unanswered questions became opportunities to trust. The map slowly folds closed once again. Its purpose is finished, its lesson remains. God sees every road, God knows every destination. God guides every step, and because He does, I can move forward without fear. Not because I know the entire route, because I know the one leading the journey. One evening, after a long and exhausting day, I opened my inbox expecting the usual collection of messages. Work updates, advertisements, reminders. Nothing important, nothing unexpected. I was already thinking about shutting down my computer and calling it a night when I noticed a message buried several lines below the newest emails. It had arrived earlier that morning. I almost missed it. In fact, if I had been in more of a hurry, I probably would have. The subject line was simple. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that immediately stood out. Yet something encouraged me to open it. As I began reading, I felt my heart become still. The message came from someone I had not heard from in a very long time. Years, perhaps. Someone whose name carried memories. Someone connected to a season of my life that God had used to shape me. The words themselves were not extraordinary. No major announcement. No life-changing revelation. Just a sincere message filled with kindness, gratitude, and encouragement. Yet somehow it arrived at exactly the right moment. The timing felt almost impossible, because that particular week had been difficult. I had been carrying doubts, questions, quiet disappointments, the kind that rarely appear on the outside but weigh heavily on the inside. And there, waiting quietly in my inbox, was a reminder that God still sees what others cannot. A reminder that He often encourages His children through unexpected people. The room around me was silent. The screen glowed softly in the darkness. And as I reread the message, gratitude filled my heart. Not merely because of what was written, because of what it revealed. God had not forgotten me. Again. He was reminding me of that truth in a way I never anticipated. The older I become, the more I notice how often God's encouragement arrives unexpectedly. Not always through grand miracles. Sometimes through a conversation, a phone call, a scripture, a memory, a message waiting quietly in an inbox. The world often teaches us to look for dramatic signs, yet God's faithfulness frequently appears in ordinary forms. The message reminded me of seasons I had survived, challenges I had overcome, lessons I had learned, and most importantly, the God who had remained faithful through all of them. I think about the people who feel unseen tonight. People quietly doing their best. People carrying responsibilities no one notices. People wondering whether their efforts matter. People questioning whether God still sees them. If I could sit beside them, I would tell them this: God sees, God knows, God remembers. Even when encouragement seems absent, even when recognition never arrives, even when the world appears silent. The message eventually ended. The screen dimmed, the evening continued, yet something inside me had changed. Hope felt stronger, gratitude felt deeper, faith felt steadier. Not because circumstances had suddenly improved, because God had reminded me that He remains involved in every detail of life. The inbox eventually closed. The computer shut down. The house grew quiet. But the lesson remained. God often places encouragement exactly where we least expect to find it. And sometimes, the message we need most has already been waiting for us all along. Tonight I opened an old prayer journal that had been resting on a shelf for several years. The cover showed signs of wear. The pages had softened with age. And between those pages were hundreds of prayers written during different seasons of my life. Some pages were filled with gratitude. Others carried tears. Some contained hopes. Others contained questions. As I slowly turned the pages, one particular entry caught my attention. A single name written at the top of the page. Just a name, nothing more. Yet the moment I saw it, memories returned. I remembered exactly why I had written it. I remembered the concern, the burden, the prayers, the long season of waiting that followed. At the time, I prayed for that person almost every day. Some days with confidence, some days with fear, some days with hope, some days with exhaustion. There were moments when I believed God was working. There were moments when I wondered if anything was happening at all. The journal remained open in my lap. The room was quiet. A soft evening light entered through the window. And as I stared at that name, I realized something beautiful. God had been faithful, not necessarily in every way I expected, not according to every timeline I imagined, but faithful nonetheless. The story attached to that name eventually unfolded. Prayers were answered, healing arrived, doors opened, growth happened. Not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily, faithfully. Looking back, I realize how often God works in ways that are invisible while they are happening. We want immediate evidence. God often provides gradual transformation. We want dramatic breakthroughs. God often produces quiet miracles. We want certainty. God invites trust. The name written in my journal reminds me of all the prayers I once thought were taking too long. Yet God's timing proved wiser than mine again and again and again. I think about all the names people are carrying tonight. The names of children, parents, friends, spouses, people they love, people they worry about, people they continue placing before God. Perhaps some of those prayers feel unanswered. Perhaps some of those stories feel unfinished. If so, I understand. I have stood in that place. I have waited. I have wondered. I have questioned. Yet tonight this old journal reminds me of something important. God never forgets the names we place before Him. Not one, not ever. The pages continue turning beneath my fingers. Each name tells a story. Each story reveals God's faithfulness. Some prayers were answered quickly. Others require years. Yet through every season, God remained present. The journal
eventually closes. The room grows darker, the evening settles around the house, and peace settles into my heart, because I remember the God who heard those prayers years ago still hears prayers today. The God who carried those stories forward is still carrying stories forward now. The God who remained faithful then remains faithful tonight, and every name placed in his hands remains safe there.
Today, while searching for a card inside my wallet, I found a folded note I had forgotten years ago. The paper was small, worn, faded by time, yet the moment I opened it, I recognized the words. A prayer written in my own handwriting, a prayer from a season when life felt uncertain, a prayer from a version of myself who desperately needed God's help. As I read it, emotion filled my heart, because I remember the person who wrote those words, the fears he carried, the questions he asked, the burdens he faced. And then I realized something: God answered nearly every prayer written on that paper. Some answers arrived quickly, others took years, yet his faithfulness appeared throughout the entire story. The note became more than paper, it became evidence, evidence of grace, evidence of provision, evidence of God's attention to details. How many prayers has he answered that I have already forgotten? How many blessings have become so familiar that I no longer recognize them as miracles? Settles around the house, and gratitude rises inside me, because this little note reminds me that God hears, God remembers, God responds. Not always according to our schedule, but always according to his wisdom. The future still contains prayers waiting for answers, yet tonight I face them with greater confidence, because I have proof written on a faded piece of paper, proof carried quietly inside a wallet. The note eventually returns to its place, but the lesson
remains close to my heart. God has been faithful. God is faithful. And God will remain faithful tomorrow.
This morning, I opened the front door and discovered a package resting quietly on the porch. I wasn't expecting it. No notification, no message, no warning. Just a simple package waiting outside. As I picked it up, I smiled, because it reminded me of how many blessings in life arrive unexpectedly. The best conversations, the best friendships, the best opportunities, the best moments of grace often arrive without announcement, without preparation, without warning. God has a way of surprising His children, not because He enjoys keeping secrets, because He enjoys revealing His goodness. The package sat on the kitchen table while I prepared breakfast, and as I looked at it, memories returned. I remembered prayers that were answered unexpectedly, provision that arrived unexpectedly, encouragement that arrived unexpectedly, open doors that appeared unexpectedly. Again and again, God's faithfulness arrived in ways I never predicted. The problem is that we often spend so much time watching one direction that we miss what God is doing somewhere else. We stare at the door we want opened, meanwhile God is delivering something entirely different, something better, something we never requested because we never imagined it. The room fills with morning light, coffee brews quietly nearby, and gratitude fills my heart, because I realize how many gifts God has placed on the porch of my life. Gifts I did not deserve, gifts I did not earn, gifts I never expected. The older I become, the more I appreciate surprises from God. Not because they are dramatic, because they reveal His kindness, His attention, His care. He knows exactly what His children need, even when they do not. The package reminds me that hope should remain alive, because God is always working beyond the limits of our expectations. There are blessings already moving toward us, answers already being prepared, doors already being arranged. We simply cannot see them yet.
The package eventually opens, its contents bring joy. Yet the greater gift is the lesson. God remains generous. God remains attentive.
God remains
Faithful. And sometimes His goodness arrives quietly on the front porch of an ordinary day.
This evening, while putting away a few things in the bedroom, I opened the closet door and noticed an old photograph taped to the inside panel. I had seen it hundreds of times, maybe thousands. Yet somehow tonight it felt different. Perhaps because the day had been long, perhaps because the room was quiet, or perhaps because God wanted to remind me of something I needed to remember. The photograph showed a much younger version of me. A different season, a different chapter, different worries, different dreams, different expectations. I stood there for several moments looking at it, remembering, reflecting, smiling. That younger man in the photograph had no idea what God was preparing. No idea which prayers would be answered. No idea which doors would close. No idea which roads would eventually become blessings. At the time, he worried about things that never happened, feared outcomes that never arrived, carried burdens that God would eventually remove. Looking back now, I wish I could speak to him, not to reveal the future, not to explain every detail, just to tell him one thing: God will be faithful. The room remains peaceful. The evening light fades beyond the window. And as I look at that photograph, gratitude begins filling my heart, because every chapter between then and now contains evidence of God's goodness. Not perfection, not ease, faithfulness again and again. The years have taught me that God often reveals His faithfulness more clearly in hindsight. While we are living through difficult seasons, everything feels uncertain. Yet later, looking back, His fingerprints appear everywhere. In the delays, in the detours, in the disappointments, in the unexpected blessings. The photograph reminds me that the God who carried me through previous chapters remains present in this chapter too. The future still contains unknowns, yet tonight I am less afraid of them, because I remember, and memory strengthens faith. The photograph remains taped inside the closet door,
a quiet witness to the years, a reminder that God has never stopped guiding the story, and He never will.
Every evening, a porch light comes on across the street from my house. Without fail, night after night, year after year, the light appears. Most evenings I barely notice it, yet tonight, sitting by the window, it caught my attention. The neighborhood was growing darker. The sky was fading into deep shades of blue. And there, across the street, a single warm light appeared. Simple, steady, faithful. Immediately it reminded me of God. Not because God is a porch light, because He remains present the way that light remains present, consistent, reliable, steady. The world changes constantly, circumstances shift, plans evolve, people come and go, yet God's character never changes. His goodness remains, His mercy remains, His love remains. The porch light shines regardless of the weather, regardless of the season, regardless of what happened during the day. And in many ways, God's faithfulness works the same way. It is not dependent on circumstances. It is not dependent on emotions. It is not dependent on our performance. It simply remains. Tonight I think about all the seasons when God's presence felt like that porch light, a steady source of comfort during uncertain times, a reminder that I was not alone, a reminder that hope remained available. The room is quiet, the neighborhood settles into sleep, and gratitude fills my heart, because I realize how many years God has faithfully illuminated my path, not always revealing the entire journey, just enough light for the next step, and that has always been enough. The porch light continues shining, the darkness continues deepening, and yet the darkness never overcomes the light, just as fear never overcomes God's faithfulness, just as uncertainty never overcomes His promises. Tonight I rest in that truth, and the simple light across the street becomes a beautiful reminder that God is still watching over His children. Earlier today, a receipt fell from the pages of an old book while I was reading. At first I almost threw it away. Just another receipt, another piece of paper, another forgotten item. Then I noticed the date. Years ago, a different season entirely. The receipt came from a bookstore I used to visit often, a place where I spent many afternoons searching for encouragement, wisdom, and inspiration. As I held the receipt, memories returned. I remembered who I was during that season, the questions I carried, the goals I pursued, the uncertainty I felt about the future. There were many things I wanted God to reveal immediately, many answers I wished He would provide. Yet He chose something different. He chose to guide me one step at a time, one lesson at a time, one page at a time. The receipt reminded me that growth often happens gradually, quietly, almost invisibly. The books I read during those years did not transform my life overnight. The prayers I prayed did not receive immediate answers. The lessons I learned took time to mature. Yet over the years, those small moments accumulated, and God used them to shape me. The afternoon sunlight fills the room. The book rests open on my lap, and gratitude fills my heart, because I realize how patient God has been with me. Patient when I wanted quick answers, patient when I doubted, patient when I struggled to trust His timing. The receipt itself is insignificant, yet the memory it carries feels valuable. It reminds me that God is always teaching, always shaping, always preparing. Even when progress feels slow, the years pass, the seasons change, yet His faithfulness remains. And tonight, the truth feels like a gift, a reminder that every chapter matters, every lesson matters, every step matters, because God wastes nothing. A few weeks ago, I stopped at a small gas station while traveling through a town I had never visited before. After filling the tank, I noticed a narrow road stretching beyond the station toward the horizon. I had no reason to take it, No destination waiting there, no appointment, no plan. Yet for some reason I found myself staring at that road, wondering where it led, wondering what existed beyond the hills, wondering what stories were unfolding in places I could not see. Life often feels like that road, we can only see part of it. A few miles, a few turns, a few details, the rest remains hidden. And if we are honest, that uncertainty can feel uncomfortable. We want maps, schedules, guarantees, yet faith invites something different. Trust in the God who sees beyond every hill. Trust in the God who knows every turn. Trust in the God who already stands in tomorrow. The road beyond the gas station reminded me of how many times God guided me into unknown territory. New opportunities, new responsibilities, new seasons. At the beginning I rarely understood where the road would lead. Sometimes I resisted, sometimes I hesitated, sometimes I worried, yet every time God proved faithful. Not because every road was easy, because He walked beside me. The journey mattered, the destination mattered, but His presence mattered most. The sun was beginning to set that evening, golden light stretched across the fields, and I found myself smiling, because I realized that uncertainty no longer frightened me the way it once did. Experience had taught me something. The unknown is never unknown to God. The future is never hidden from God, and the road ahead never exists beyond His care. Tonight I remember that road, and I remember His faithfulness. The same God who guided yesterday is guiding tomorrow. The same God who opened previous paths will open future ones. And wherever the road leads, His presence will already be there. A few years ago, I attended a reunion with people I had not seen in a very long time. Old friends, former classmates, people who once shared daily life with me before the years carried us in different directions. The room was filled with laughter, stories, memories, conversations about careers, families, victories, and unexpected turns in life. Everyone seemed eager to reconnect. Yet before the event began, I found myself sitting alone at a table near the back of the room. There was an empty seat beside me. At first, I paid little attention to it. But as people entered and found places to sit, I noticed the chair remained empty. For a few moments, I felt strangely invisible. It sounds foolish now,
But loneliness has a way of magnifying small things. The room was crowded, yet the empty chair seemed louder than all the conversations. As I sat there, I quietly prayed. Not because I was deeply troubled, just because I needed God's presence. I needed the reminder that I was not alone. The amazing thing is that within a few minutes, someone walked across the room and sat beside me. An old friend, someone I had not spoken to in years. And before the evening ended, that conversation became one of the most meaningful parts of the entire reunion. We talked about faith, about struggles, about God's faithfulness, about seasons neither of us expected. And as the conversation unfolded, I realized something. God often fills empty places, not always immediately, not always in the way we expect. But faithfully, the empty chair beside me became a lesson, a reminder that loneliness rarely tells the whole truth, a reminder that God's provision often arrives unexpectedly, a reminder that waiting does not mean abandonment. The years have taught me that many people carry loneliness quietly, even in crowded rooms, even surrounded by others, even while smiling. And perhaps some people feel that way tonight. Perhaps they are sitting beside an empty chair of their own, waiting, wondering, hoping. If so, I want them to know something.
God sees the empty chair.
God sees the silent prayer.
God sees the longing hidden
beneath the surface, and He remains present. The reunion eventually ended. The tables were cleared, the lights were turned off. People returned to their homes, yet the lesson remained. The God who fills empty hearts also knows how to fill empty seats. The God who provides friendship also provides comfort. The God who remains near during loneliness remains near tonight. The memory still makes me smile. Not because of the reunion itself, because of the reminder. God is never absent from the room, never absent from the story, never absent from the waiting. And when His timing arrives, even an empty chair can become evidence of His faithfulness.
Every Sunday morning, there is a sidewalk that leads from the parking lot to the front doors of the church. Most people walk across it without thinking. I know I often have. It is simply part of the routine. Park the car, walk the path, enter the building, find a seat. Yet last Sunday, something caused me to slow down. Perhaps it was the beautiful weather. Perhaps it was the quietness of the morning. Or perhaps God wanted to remind me of something I had overlooked. The sidewalk stretched ahead of me, simple, ordinary, well-worn from Thousands of people had walked that same path. People carrying joy, people carrying grief, people carrying hope, people carrying questions, people carrying burdens nobody else could see. And as I walked, I realized that every one of them had arrived needing something from God. Some came seeking peace, some came seeking healing, some came seeking direction, some came simply seeking the strength to keep going. In many ways, the sidewalk represented the journey of faith itself. One step at a time, not the entire road at once, just the next step, and then another, and another. That is how God has always guided me, rarely by revealing everything, usually by showing me enough light for the next step, enough grace for today, enough strength for this season, enough faith for this moment. The church building stood ahead, sunlight reflected from its windows. People greeted one another with smiles, children laughed nearby, and gratitude filled my heart, because I realized how many steps God had already guided me through. Steps I never thought I could take, steps through grief, steps through uncertainty, steps through disappointment, steps through waiting. At the time, many of those roads felt impossible, yet somehow God provided what I needed. One day at a time,
One prayer at a time,
one prayer at a time.
one step at a time.
The sidewalk reminded me that faith is not about seeing the entire journey. Faith is about trusting the one who knows the journey. The future still contains unknowns. There are prayers I continue praying, dreams I continue trusting God with, questions I continue carrying. Yet none of those things feel as frightening as they once did, because experience has taught me something. God is faithful on the path, faithful in the waiting, faithful during uncertainty, faithful through every season. The service eventually began. The music filled the sanctuary, the message encouraged my heart. Yet one of the most meaningful moments happened before I ever entered the building. On a simple sidewalk, during an ordinary walk, while God gently reminded me that every step taken with Him is a step taken in hope. And tonight, as I remember that morning, I feel grateful, grateful for the journey, grateful for the guidance, grateful for the God who continues walking beside me.
One faithful step
At a time. There is a spare key hanging beside the back door of my house. Most days I never think about it. it simply remains there, quiet, unnoticed, waiting. Yet this morning it caught my attention, perhaps because sunlight was shining directly upon it. Perhaps because I was already reflecting on God's faithfulness. Or perhaps because God wanted to remind me of something important. The key exists for moments when access seems impossible, moments when a door is closed, moments when the usual way forward cannot be used, moments when another solution becomes necessary. As I looked at it, I thought about all the times God provided unexpected ways forward in my life. Times when I believed every option had disappeared. Times when I thought the story had reached a dead end. Times when I could not see a path. Yet somehow, without fail, God opened another way. Not always the way I wanted, not always the way I expected, but always the way I needed. I remember seasons when opportunities vanished unexpectedly, plans collapsed, resources seemed insufficient, doors closed one after another. At the time I assumed the story was ending, but God was not finished. He never is. The spare key reminds me that God often has solutions we cannot see. While we focus on the closed door, He already knows another entrance. While we panic over obstacles, He prepares provision. While we struggle to understand, He quietly continues working. The house feels peaceful today. The sunlight fills the hallway. The key hangs silently where it always has. And yet its message feels powerful. Trust God when you cannot see the way. Trust God when the door remains closed. Trust God when the plan changes, because His wisdom extends far beyond your understanding. The older I become, the more evidence I find of His provision. Unexpected friendships, unexpected opportunities, unexpected answers, unexpected grace. Many of the greatest blessings in my life arrive through doors I never knew existed. That realization fills me with hope, because there are still prayers waiting for answers, still dreams waiting for fulfillment, still questions waiting for clarity. Yet I no longer believe closed doors mean the story is over. God is too creative, too faithful, too loving. The spare key remains hanging beside the door, a simple object carrying a profound reminder. God always knows a way forward, even when I cannot see it, especially when I cannot see it. The day slowly moves toward evening. The sunlight shifts, the hallway grows quieter, and peace settles into my heart. Not because I understand every detail of the future, but because I trust the God who already does. The God who opens doors no one can close. The God who provides what no one else can provide. The God who remains faithful in every season.
And tonight, the truth feels like hope. Hope hanging quietly beside the door, waiting to remind me once again that God's plans are always greater than my fears.
There is an umbrella leaning against the wall near the entrance of my home. Most days I barely notice it. Yet tonight, after a brief rain shower passed through the neighborhood, it caught my attention. The umbrella exists because storms exist. Rain eventually comes, clouds eventually gather, weather eventually changes. No one is surprised by that. Yet when storms arrive in life, we often react differently. We act as though difficulty should never happen, as though faith should eliminate every challenge, as though following God should prevent every storm. Experience has taught me otherwise. Faith does not remove every storm. Faith teaches us who to trust within the storm. The umbrella leaning against the wall reminds me of God's provision. Not because it prevents rain, because it provides protection while rain falls. And God's grace often works the same way. There have been seasons when I prayed for storms to disappear. Sometimes they did,
Sometimes they did.
yet in every case, God provided what I needed. Strength,
Peace,
wisdom,
endurance,
comfort,
His provision arrived.
exactly when required.
The rain outside
Has already stopped. The streets shine beneath the evening light. The sky is clearing. And as I look at the umbrella, I think about every difficult season God has carried me through. Every challenge, every disappointment, every unexpected detour, none of them lasted forever. The storm always passed, and God's faithfulness always remained. That realization changes the way I view today's challenges. Because if God was faithful then, He will be faithful now. If He carried me before, He will carry me again. If He provided in previous storms, He will provide in future ones. The umbrella remains quietly beside the door. A simple reminder: storms come, storms go, God remains. And tonight that truth feels stronger than every cloud on the horizon.